James had always found comfort in the hum of machines. The low, steady buzz of his tools as he worked on the intergalactic space station brought him a sense of peace that few things in life could. He wasn't the sort of person to get tangled up in political matters or galactic conflicts. He was a technician, and that was all he needed to be. Life was simple, or at least it had been. The space station was a vast, floating structure, bustling with life from dozens of different species. Humans, aliens of all shapes and sizes, and creatures from planets James could hardly pronounce, all mingled in a sea of color and noise. It wasn't the place for someone who preferred quiet solitude, but as always, it was his job to keep the machines running smoothly. That's what kept him on the station despite the chaos outside. That day started like any other. The station was busy, the corridors alive with the hustle of crew members, traders, and soldiers. James had just finished recalibrating the station's core power system when a sudden burst of alarms filled the air. His first thought was that it was another drill. The station had been on high alert for weeks now, ever since the rumors started that war was on the horizon. But this time the alarms didn't stop. The lights flickered and the ground beneath James' feet rumbled. It wasn't a drill. He moved quickly, his mind racing. He had to get to the emergency control room. The station's power systems were linked to everything, and if there was a breach, the entire station could go down. He rushed down the narrow corridor, his boots clanging against the metal floor. But then, as he turned a corner, he saw her. The woman stood alone in the middle of the corridor, her pale blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her features were sharp, almost regal, with high cheekbones and piercing silver eyes that seemed to look right through him. She wore a dark, form-fitting suit made of some sort of metallic fabric that shimmered in the light. Her hair was long, flowing like liquid silver, and it cascaded around her shoulders in waves. She stood tall, poised, and perfectly still as the chaos swirled around her. James froze in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen her before, in passing, but never like this. There was something about her, something that drew his attention in a way he couldn't explain. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment everything else seemed to disappear. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, trying to sound confident. But his voice wavered, and he hated himself for it. The woman didn't respond immediately. She took a slow step toward him, her movements fluid and graceful. It was almost as if she were gliding across the floor, her steps making no sound at all. As she drew nearer, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His instincts told him to run, to get as far away from her as possible, but something kept him rooted to the spot. When she reached him, she stopped. She was so close now that James could feel the heat radiating from her skin. It was a strange warmth, not like human warmth, but something alien, something otherworldly. "You're not afraid," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. It was the kind of voice that made you listen, made you hang on every word. James blinked, unsure how to respond. His heart was still racing, but he couldn't bring himself to look away. Her eyes, those silver eyes, held him captive. I don't know what's going on," he admitted. "The alarms, the power fluctuations, what's happening?" The woman's gaze softened, and for a moment she almost seemed human, but only for a moment. "You don't need to worry about that," she replied. "It's not your fight." Before James could say anything else, the station was rocked by a violent tremor. The lights went out completely, plunging them both into darkness. There was a loud crash, followed by the sound of footsteps running in every direction. Panic had begun to spread. The woman moved again, faster than James could track. Within moments, she had his arm in her grip, pulling him toward an exit he hadn't noticed before. The speed of her movement shocked him. He couldn't even comprehend how she moved so fast. "Come with me," she commanded, her voice no longer soft but filled with urgency. James didn't have a choice. He didn't want to be left alone in the chaos. Whatever was happening, whatever was coming, he had a feeling that staying with her was his only chance. They ran through the darkened halls, passing abandoned rooms and overturned equipment. The station was a mess, and it was clear now that this wasn't a random emergency. Someone, or something, had caused this. After what felt like hours, they reached a secure room deep within the station. The door closed behind them with a hiss, sealing them inside. The room was dark, but there was a small light that flickered above them. James tried to catch his breath. "Who are you?" he asked, still bewildered by everything that had happened in such a short time. The woman stood before him, her eyes locking with his once more. This time she didn't look away. "I am Zara," she said simply, "and I've chosen you." James blinked. "What? Chosen me for what?" Zara stepped closer, her presence overwhelming him. "You're different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something in you. I can feel it, something that will change everything." James didn't understand. "What are you talking about?" Zara's expression softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of something in her eyes. It was almost vulnerable, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "The factions that hunt me want something from you. They believe you hold the key to my past, to my future." She paused, her gaze intense. "But I want you, human, not just your future, but you." James didn't know what to say. Everything was happening too fast. There was no way he could understand what she was talking about. Zara wasn't just any alien. She was someone important, someone dangerous, and somehow, against all logic, she had decided that he mattered. "I don't know what you mean," James stammered, "but I don't want any part of this." Zara's eyes narrowed, but she didn't push him. Instead, she turned toward the room's control panel, typing quickly with her long, delicate fingers. "You don't have a choice," she said softly. "The moment you crossed paths with me, you became part of something much bigger than yourself." Before James could respond, the room suddenly lit up with red emergency lights, and a voice crackled over the comms. "Zara, we know you're here. You can't run forever." Zara's eyes narrowed, and she looked back at James, her expression hardening. "It's already too late." The sound of the station's alarms had faded, replaced by the steady hum of emergency power systems. The low, mechanical sound seemed almost too calm compared to the chaos that had erupted earlier. James stood in the secure room, still trying to piece together what was happening. His heart beat fast, and his thoughts were scattered. The woman, Zara, stood across from him, her expression unreadable as she worked at the control panel. "Who are they?" James asked, finally breaking the silence. "The people who want you." Zara didn't look up from the panel as she adjusted something, her fingers moving deftly. "They are the ones who will stop at nothing to gain control of this station, and they will come for you next." "I don't understand," James replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "What do they want from me? I'm just a technician." Zara's eyes flickered briefly toward him. "You are not just a technician," she said softly. "There is something about you that they believe is the key to everything, but they don't understand you the way I do." James stepped back, his mind spinning. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He had just been doing his job, fixing machines, staying out of trouble. Now, he was in a secure room with an alien woman who seemed to think he was important in some way he couldn't even begin to understand. "I don't want any part of this," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't ask for any of this." Zara sighed, her shoulders stiffening. "No one ever asks for their fate to change," she said quietly. "But when you're faced with a choice, sometimes there's no turning back." James didn't know how to respond to that. He didn't want to be part of something bigger than himself. All he wanted was a quiet life, doing his work without getting tangled up in galactic politics or alien wars. Zara turned away from the control panel, her gaze steady. "You'll have to choose soon, James. This isn't something you can run from." James didn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "The factions that hunt me, they are ruthless. They will not stop until they have what they want. And right now, they believe you are the key to getting it. But I don't know anything about it, James protested. Zara's eyes softened for a brief moment as if she understood his confusion. You don't have to understand. But what they don't know is that your humanity is your greatest strength. They underestimate you because they don't know what it means to be human. James looked at her, unsure of what she meant. He wasn't anything special. He wasn't some great warrior or leader. He was just James, the guy who fixed things. But Zara seemed to believe that there was more to him, something hidden beneath the surface. And for some reason it unsettled him. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara paused, her gaze shifting as if she was weighing her words carefully. "Because you are the one who can help me," she said finally. "You are the one who can help stop them." James shook his head. "I don't know how, I don't even know who they are. I'm not a fighter." Zara's lips curved into a faint smile. "You don't need to be a fighter, not in the way you think. You have something they cannot understand. You have a strength they can't measure." James felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" She stepped closer, her voice low and firm. "Your heart, your willingness to fight for what's right no matter the cost. That is what makes you different. That is why I chose you." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment James didn't know what to say. He wasn't some hero, and he didn't have the strength or the skills to fight anyone. He was just a guy who fixed things, who did his job and went home. But here he was, standing in front of an alien woman who was telling him that he had something inside him that made him special. "I didn't choose this," he said finally, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. Zara's expression softened again. "I know you didn't, but now that you've been chosen, there's no turning back." James didn't know what to do with that. His thoughts were racing, his mind torn between the urge to run and the strange pull that Zara seemed to have over him. She had saved him, but she was also asking him to join a fight he didn't understand, against enemies he didn't know. He opened his mouth to protest again, but before he could speak, the door to the secure room suddenly slammed open. James jumped back, his heart leaping in his chest. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim emergency lights. The man was tall, his face obscured by a dark hood, but his presence was unmistakable. "Zara," the man's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "It's time." Zara's eyes flickered toward the man, then back to James. For a moment, James thought he saw hesitation in her gaze. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. "I have no choice," Zara said, her voice almost a whisper. "Neither do I," James replied, his voice tight with uncertainty. He didn't know what was happening, but he could feel the tension in the room. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The man in the doorway stepped forward, and as he did, a group of armed soldiers filed into the room behind him. They wore the same dark uniforms, their faces masked and their weapons at the ready. They didn't look human. James recognized them as part of the elite faction Zara had mentioned earlier. They had the same cold, calculating look in their eyes. "Time's up," the man said again, his voice still calm, but there was a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. Zara stood her ground, her posture rigid. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice steady, though James could hear the tension in it. The man smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long, Zara. It's over." Before anyone could react, the room was filled with the sound of blaster fire. The soldiers opened fire, and Zara moved in a blur of motion, deflecting the shots with ease. Her movements were so fast, so graceful, that James could barely keep up. But as the chaos erupted around him, something inside James clicked. He wasn't going to stand there, frozen. He wasn't just going to let Zara fight alone. He grabbed a nearby tool from the control panel, something that could barely be considered a weapon, but it was enough. It was something to fight with. As Zara continued to defend herself, James rushed forward, swinging the tool at one of the soldiers. The soldier stumbled back in surprise, but he quickly recovered, raising his weapon. But Zara was faster. She stepped in front of James, her hand raised, and with a single sharp motion the soldier was on the ground, unconscious. "Stay close," she said, her voice low but commanding. James didn't question her. He followed her, feeling a rush of adrenaline as they moved through the chaos. Whatever this was, whatever he had gotten himself into, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let Zara fight alone. The air in the secure room grew heavy with tension as Zara and James moved through the chaos of the station. The soldiers were relentless, and the sound of blaster fire echoed down the corridors, mingling with the panicked voices of those fleeing the conflict. The station, once a peaceful hub of intergalactic trade, was now a battleground. James had no idea where they were headed. All he knew was that Zara was in control, and for the first time since the alarms had gone off, he felt a sense of purpose. His heart still raced, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something deeper. The more time he spent with Zara, the more he realized that his life was no longer just about fixing machines. He had been thrust into a fight for survival, and it was a fight he couldn't ignore. "Stay close," Zara said, her voice steady as they moved down the narrow corridors. "We need to get to the hangar. Once we're there, we can escape." James nodded, though the uncertainty in his chest remained. Escape from what? From who? He had no idea what was going on, only that Zara seemed to have a plan, and at this point that was enough. They rounded a corner, and suddenly they were face to face with a group of soldiers, more than a dozen, all armed and ready. James barely had time to react before Zara was already in motion, moving with the fluidity of someone who had spent a lifetime in battle. She was a blur, her movements so fast that James could barely keep up. The soldiers didn't stand a chance. Zara took them down one by one with a precision that left James in awe. But as the last soldier fell to the ground, Zara paused. Her breath was steady, but there was a hint of something in her eyes, something dark. She looked at James, her gaze intense. "We need to move now," she said, her voice urgent. James didn't need to be told twice. They continued running, Zara leading the way with a purpose he didn't fully understand. They passed by empty rooms, storage bays, and maintenance halls, all eerily quiet except for the occasional sound of distant footsteps or blaster fire. It felt like the whole station was falling apart, and James couldn't help but wonder how much longer it would be before they were completely overwhelmed. They reached a large elevator at the end of the hall, and Zara quickly punched in the code to open the doors. As the elevator doors slid open, James caught a glimpse of the hangar bay, a vast, open space filled with ships of all shapes and sizes. But there was something wrong. The hangar was empty. The ships were gone. "No," Zara muttered under her breath. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the empty bay. James felt a chill run down his spine. "What's wrong? Where are the ships?" "They're gone," Zara said, her voice tight with frustration. "We were supposed to have a ship ready, but it looks like they've taken them all." James stared at the empty hangar, trying to process what Zara was saying. They were stranded. There was no way off the station now, no way to escape. Before he could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. James turned just in time to see a familiar face step out from behind a stack of crates. It was a man he had seen around the station before, though he couldn't remember his name. He was wearing a uniform that identified him as part of the station's security detail, but his expression was far from reassuring. In fact, there was a coldness to him now that James had never noticed before. "Zara," the man said, his voice calm but laced with something darker. "You didn't think you could escape that easily, did you?" Zara tensed, her eyes narrowing as she took a step forward. "I should have known it was you, Marcus." James didn't understand. He had thought Marcus was on their side, but now it seemed like everything was falling apart. He looked from Marcus to Zara, trying to make sense of the situation. "What's going on?" James asked, his voice filled with confusion. Marcus's gaze shifted to James, and for the first time James felt a wave of dread wash over him. "It's simple, really," Marcus said. "Zara's betrayal has cost us everything. She made her choice and now we all have to pay for it." Zara's expression darkened. "Betrayal? You're the one who betrayed me, Marcus. You were supposed to be on my side." The man smiled, but it was a smile full of malice. "I was never on your side, Zara, not really. You were always too dangerous, too unpredictable. We've had enough of your kind." James took a step back, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "You're with them?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer to Zara, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm with whoever will give me the power I need. And right now, that's not you, Zara. You've outlived your usefulness." Zara's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. "You think you can just take control, Marcus? You don't know what you're dealing with." Marcus's expression didn't change. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. You've always been a threat, Zara, and now it's time to finish what we started." Before James could react, Marcus pulled out a small device from his belt and pressed a button. The sound of mechanical locks disengaging echoed through the hangar, and suddenly, several security doors slid open, revealing more soldiers, each one armed and ready. James's heart pounded in his chest. They were surrounded. There was no way out. Zara stepped in front of James, her stance protective. "You don't have to do this, Marcus," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'll leave. I'll go and you can have whatever you want. But don't do this." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he nodded to his soldiers who began to move in. But Zara wasn't going down without a fight. In a flash, she was on the move again, her body a blur of speed and power. She took out one soldier, then another, her movements precise and lethal. James stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He had never seen anyone fight like this. It was like watching a storm unravel, but the soldiers were relentless. They moved quickly, surrounding Zara as she fought, trying to take her down. It was clear that they had been preparing for this moment for a long time. James felt a surge of panic. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He spotted an emergency panel on the wall, a red button that he knew would activate the station's lockdown system. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. Without thinking, he ran toward the panel and slammed his hand down on the button. The doors around them slammed shut, sealing off the hangar and trapping everyone inside. The soldiers froze, momentarily confused. Zara looked at James, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But their brief moment of relief didn't last long. Marcus's face twisted into an expression of pure rage. "You think you can lock me in here," he spat. "You think you can stop me." But Zara wasn't about to let him win. She lunged forward once more, taking out another soldier as James looked on, his heart pounding. They were trapped, but they weren't finished yet. The hangar was now a battlefield. Zara stood in the middle, her eyes sharp as she continued to fight off Marcus's soldiers, each movement fluid, precise, and calculated. She moved like a shadow, quick and deadly, but James could see that even she was starting to tire. The soldiers were relentless, closing in from all sides, and although the lockdown had bought them some time, it wouldn't hold for long. Marcus had a way of getting what he wanted, and time was quickly running out. James's heart raced as he watched Zara. He had no idea how long she could keep this up. He could see the sweat on her brow, the strain in her movements. She was powerful, but even the strongest could be overwhelmed if they were pushed too far. He had to do something. He couldn't just watch. The panel he had activated earlier was still holding the doors shut, but James knew it wouldn't be enough to stop Marcus and his men forever. They would find a way around it. He had to help Zara. He had to do something that could make a difference. Zara was fighting with everything she had, but even she couldn't take on all of them forever. The soldiers were getting smarter, working together to outmaneuver her. He could see the panic in her eyes when one soldier managed to land a hit, a blow that sent her stumbling back. For the first time, James saw her falter. "Zara," he called, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos around them. She heard him, though, her eyes flicking to him for a moment, her expression fierce and determined. But she couldn't speak, and James could see the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She needed help. She couldn't do this alone. Without thinking, he ran forward, grabbing a nearby blaster from the fallen soldier. It wasn't much, but it was something. He raised the weapon, aimed it at one of the soldiers, and fired. The soldier dropped to the floor, a stunned look in his eyes. It wasn't a clean shot. He had never used a blaster before, but it was enough to create an opening. "Zara, we need to go," James shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. Zara looked at him, her expression unreadable for a split second. Then, without a word, she nodded and moved toward him, her body flowing like water as she tore through the remaining soldiers with a speed James couldn't match. She was unstoppable when she fought like this, but he could see she was starting to lose her energy. They both needed a plan, and they needed it fast. James took a deep breath, focusing. He had to help Zara get out of here, or they would both be trapped. The hangar doors were locked, but there had to be another way. He looked around, scanning the area for anything that could give them an advantage. That's when he saw it, the old maintenance lift near the back of the hangar. It was an emergency escape route, used only in cases of extreme need. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "Over there," James pointed to the lift, and Zara followed his gaze. Her expression softened for just a moment, as if she finally saw what he had planned. "Good eyes," she said, her voice low but full of approval. They fought their way toward the lift, side by side. James had never felt more alive than in this moment, as if everything in his life had led to this point. The uncertainty, the fear, it was all still there, but there was something else now, a resolve. He wasn't just running away from this fight. He was in it all the way with Zara. Whatever happened, he wasn't backing down. They reached the lift just as the last of the soldiers regrouped. But before they could advance, Zara moved like lightning, knocking the first soldier to the ground and sending another into the wall with a powerful strike. James fired the blaster again, hitting a soldier square in the chest, and the man fell without a sound. But the situation was growing more desperate by the second. Marcus was still somewhere out there, and James knew that the longer they stayed, the greater the risk. He pushed the button to activate the lift, praying it would work. The lift door slid open, and Zara was the first to step inside. "Go," she ordered, her eyes already scanning for any new threats. James hesitated for only a moment before following her inside. He didn't need to be told twice. The lift began to ascend, slowly at first, then picking up speed as they rose higher and higher. They passed through the station's various levels, the clanking of the machinery beneath them as they moved. For a moment, the noise of the battle below faded, replaced by the sound of the lift's hum and the rush of adrenaline in James's veins. But it wasn't over yet. Marcus would be after them, and they weren't safe, not by a long shot. The lift was just a temporary escape. They needed to get off the station entirely. Zara turned to James, her face set with determination. "We're not safe until we're off this station. Marcus will send everything after us." "I know," James replied, his voice steady, "but we have a chance. We just have to make it to the outer docking bay. There's a small freighter there. I've seen it before. We can take it." Zara's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment it seemed as if she was considering something. But then she nodded, her expression hardening once again. "Let's do it." As the lift reached the final level, the doors opened, revealing the dark corridors of the station's outer edge. The sound of distant alarms and blaster fire still echoed through the halls, but it was quieter here, more isolated. They moved quickly, Zara leading the way with her usual grace and precision. They reached the docking bay just as they heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. The freighter was just ahead, but they weren't alone. Two soldiers stood guard, blocking the entrance. James's heart skipped a beat. They couldn't afford to waste time. Zara was already moving, stepping silently toward the guards. She was swift, her movements nearly invisible in the dim light. In an instant, she was upon them, taking one guard down with a single blow, while the other tried to raise his weapon. James didn't wait to see what happened. He ran forward, grabbing the soldier's weapon and firing before the man could react. The soldier crumpled to the ground and James rushed to the freighter's entrance. "Inside now," Zara called, her voice sharp as she moved toward the cockpit. James followed, his body still shaking from the fight. The moment they were inside, Zara began the startup sequence. The freighter's engines roared to life, and James felt a wave of relief wash over him. They were going to make it. But as the ship rose off the ground, James couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. Marcus and his soldiers wouldn't give up that easily. There would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face, but for now they were free. As the station grew smaller behind them, James looked at Zara, his heart heavy with the knowledge that their fight had only just begun. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. "Where do we go now?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Zara turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a steady calm. "We go wherever we need to. We fight for what's right." James nodded. It was a new beginning, one that he wasn't sure he was ready for, but it didn't matter. He was in this now with Zara, and whatever came next, they would face it together.